Hey everyone, welcome to Tales and Decks and I'm your host Nisha. I hope your day is going fabulous and welcome to another video. So I was browsing through YouTube and I decided to check out what new tarot challenges there are, and I really enjoyed watching these videos and I was inspired to start my own hashtag for tarot, and if you feel called to it, I welcome you to participate in this prompt exercise and exploration as well. So let's dive right into today's video, which is hashtag explore my favorite decks. Now you can choose to explore a single favorite deck or you can showcase multiple decks. I am not going to put a bar on whether this is a tarot deck or an oracle deck or a lenormand or a kipper or a deste or any other deck that you have. It is your choice. You can explore whichever cartomancy deck that you have and according to the prompts given below, and feel free to add any additional bonus prompts that you want to discuss as well. My very first prompt for this video was, which is one deck that I just cannot imagine my life without, and there is just one deck that comes to mind when I think of this. It is a deck that is literally right on top of my list of all cartomancy decks that I own, and that is the Living Altar Oracle. Now, if you've been following my channel, whether it is Tales in Text or my previous channel, which was South Asian Mystic, you would have known that I am a huge lover and proponent of the Living Altar Oracle deck. Now, for those of you who don't know what the Living Altar Oracle deck is, the Living Altar deck is actually a magical deck created by two practitioners of magic, and they have brought together essentially various spells. They brought together the elements, the seasons, the phases of life, the phases of the sun and the moon, just absolutely everything that makes up life. We brought it all together into this magical, glorious deck. This is one deck that I absolutely cannot imagine my life without. And that's mainly because of how many amazing changes this deck has really brought into my life. It's a working deck that is actively releasing its magic, is perfect for spell work. It's a deck that really lets you get in touch with your inner instinctual, animalistic, this bear psyche that that is seldom kind of that we seldom reach across to. Whoever has this, I think they'll know what I'm talking about. So my next prompt for this video was, when did I first come across this deck? So I came across this deck at the start or maybe mid 2020, and I had actually just returned to Instagram at that time, and when I came onto Instagram, I was just browsing through various tarot and witchy channels, and I found a particular practitioner who was showing this deck. I mean, it wasn't the creators of the Living Altar, but it was someone who was using this deck. And that very moment I was very intrigued. I was like, what deck is this? Like, I've never seen anything this powerful. It's just so raw and so instinctual. That's the word that kind of pops up to me when I think of this deck. And I wrote a comment, and this person came back on Instagram via message and said, hey, you know what, this is the Living Altar. They just wrapped up their Kickstarter last year, and I just received my deck like a couple of days ago. Maybe they have something on their website, why don't you check it out? And I did. I checked it out. Unfortunately, I didn't know whether they delivered to India or not, because especially during the peak of COVID, India was shutting down, as were so many other countries. And shipping was something that was like unreliable. And even otherwise, a lot of US creators, deck creators, don't ship to India because shipping charges are astronomical, to say the least. And so I wrote to the Living Altar, and they got back to me a few days later saying, you know what, hey, we'll give it a try. You are going to be our first South Asian customer, so you know what, I'm not going to let you down. I'm going to give it a try. So send me your address. You know what, we'll check it out. We'll make it happen. And I did. And a couple of months later, this deck was in my hands. So big shout out to Yilva and Kiki and the rest of the Living Altar team for making this happen, because you really changed my life. So that's how I came across it. It was just after the Kickstarter campaign, and it was a couple of months before I could actually afford it, because this deck is pretty expensive, even for American standards. And as someone who lives in India, living on Indian rupees, which is definitely lesser in value compared to American dollars, this deck was definitely very, very expensive. But I'm so glad I made this investment. The next prompt: what attracted you to this deck? Now, one thing that I always do in my own personal magical practice is I work with the elements a lot. I work with this physical realm. I know that there are a lot of people who work with the spiritual realm, who work with their ancestors, who work with more deities. And while I do have a patron deity, and while I do enjoy the idea of working with ancestral spirits, I work mainly in this corporeal, physical realm. I work with the elements, I work with the trees, I work with my, the plants at home, I work with a cup of water. So, the things that I am like actually experiencing, the things that I can feel and I can see, and my very physical senses can experience, those are the things that I work with. And what I really loved about this deck was that it captured all of these very real elements that can seem mundane, but which are actually so magical. Next question is, what has kept you attracted to this deck all along? Now, it's been more than a year since I got this deck already, but I still love this deck because of the very real, my neighbor's kids. The connection is still very real and active. Like I mentioned earlier, this deck is just so full of magic. It can quite literally bring to life the energies that are play in my personal experience. They divine certain experiences before they happen. They are very active and energetically, because they are ultimately, spell cards at their very core. So they're very active energetically. Think of them sort of like a open altar, constantly working. So I can just pick a card that I want to work with and just infuse it into a spell. So they're very easy to and very malleable and versatile in the way I can use it. Of course, speaking of usage and versatility, this is not a deck that I use like a normal oracle deck or a tarot deck would be used for daily practice. This is not such a deck. Instead, I use this more as an altar card deck, an altar deck which is always there on my open working altars. It's there on my closed spells, those particular time bound spells. I use them there. So that's the reason why I'm still very attracted to this deck. It's because it is so usable without being, just same old pull a card a day deck. It is still so usable because it is still very active. And I think personally I find the Living Altar Oracle very engaging, because some decks are just so communicative, right? Whereas some decks are kind of like, they're passive, they're like, let's keep some distance. This deck is very engaging. This deck is very communicative. It reaches out and talks to me, and it is something that I can engage with with all my senses. My next question is, how do you use this deck? I already mentioned this, so I'm going to just skip this question, because I did talk of how I use this deck in spell work and on my altar. So that's how I use this deck. My next prompt for this video was, how has your evolution or your journey been like with this deck? And that's a really interesting thing, because initially when I got the Living Altar, I found it really hard to connect with some of the cards. I just didn't know how to use this deck. For one, like I mentioned, this deck is not something that you can just read like a regular oracle deck. I mean, I know the creators say that you can definitely read it like an oracle deck, but in my personal experience, this is not so easy to kind of bring into your normal everyday pull a card tarot oracle practice. So When I initially got this deck, there wasn't any hesitation in terms of, hey, did I spend the money on the wrong one? No, because I really did like this deck, like I mentioned. But it was more a question of how do I use it every day, because I had no clue how to use this deck. And the guidebook also is quite different compared to other guidebooks, because here you don't really have a message about the card. Rather, these are sort of like open spells. They are spells written by the creators of this deck, which you can use as a way to understand the energy behind each card. So initially for me it was a little difficult to figure out how do I use this cards, how do I infuse them into my own magical practice. But over time, I've over this past 1.5 years, I have actually found really wonderful ways to bring it into my day-to-day life. In a way, sometimes the cards let me know when it's time to change the card on the altar. For example, so if I keep spring on my altar, it isn't necessary that I use this card specifically during springtime or during any spring Sabbath. I can keep them whenever I feel called to keep this card on the altar. And some days the cards stay on just for like 1 day, so 2 days, or maybe even just a couple of hours. But other times there have been times when certain cards have stayed on for months on the altar. And the deck lets me know when there is an energetic shift happening, and I change the cards on my altar, I change the cards in my spell work. That is the evolution that I've seen with this deck, wherein the deck, like I mentioned earlier, it actively communicates with me, which is why working with it has become so much easier. My next question is, what is your most favorite card from this deck? And incidentally, as I was pulling and showing cards for you from this deck, my most favorite card just kind of lay on the top of the pile, and it is this one, the Ancestors. Isn't it gorgeous? So the reason I really love this card is because of two reasons. One, if you've, like I mentioned, if you've seen my channels, you will know that I'm someone who works almost exclusively with animal themed decks. I will link the video down below why I do that. It's a very personal experience that I shared on my older channel, South Asian Mystic. I will definitely link that video down below. And in a way, this Ancestor card reminds me of my connection with the non-human animals and plants that populate this earth and that once walked this earth and that are not there anymore. It reminds me of the inherent connection, deep bonds that I have with the Mother Earth and my role and my responsibility towards this planet. We are all hurtling towards this really dangerous precipice. Once we cross that edge, there's no coming back. With climate change and pollution and just all the other crap that's happening, we as humans are not being responsible with the gift that we've been given. This planet is a gift. It's not our inheritance to squander any way we want. It's a gift. And this card really reiterates to me the deep bonds that are there between me and this planet and all the other creatures that walked upon it once, and that walk upon it today, and that will walk upon it tomorrow. And because of this inherent connection, I feel like my actions can definitely have an impact, not just on the more physical, mundane level, in the form of reducing my carbon footprint, but even magically speaking, energetically speaking, I can work wonders if I put all my resources towards it and consciously try to heal the planet. So that's one reason. And the second is, Ancestors reminds me of my country's colonial past. So some of you may know this, some of you may not, but I'm from India. I am living in India currently. And I see that colonialism, even though the colonial people, the colonial rulers, the British, the French, the Portuguese, the Spanish, although they physically left the country, their presence and their rule still very much remains. And what I mean is the ideals and ideas that they've left behind on our country, right from the obsession with fair skin. For example, India is one of the largest markets for skin bleaching agents. Essentially, for example, Fair and Lovely was a product. And even the name, Fair and Lovely, if you're white, that means you're lovely, you're respected, you are amazing, you're beautiful, you're deserving of love. If you're dark, you don't deserve any of the good things. So that's the insinuation that's there. And even today, a lot of Indian beauty standards are and ideals are based on European standards of beauty, European ideals of beauty. You know, the fair skin, light eyes, light hair, straight hair, not curled, tiny bodies with tiny waist, tiny hips, tall. This is not what a normal Indian woman looks like. You know, we are curvaceous, we tend to be on the shorter side, we are heavy set, we do have wavy curly hair, we have darker skin. In fact, India has such different degrees of skin tones, you know, that it's hard to peg down a particular skin tone as Indian, because there are so many different regions with different temperatures, there are different climates that affects melanin production differently. And to kind of pigeonhole and typecast Indian beauty into one thing, that's a vestige of colonialism. And there are so many things like this. And even, for example, the basic laws, the Constitution of India has so many laws that were actually created at the time of the British Empire. So as you can see, in these almost seven plus decades of Indian independence, of India having gotten independent, we still follow a majority of laws that were actually created by our British overlords. And so the ancestor card is a huge reminder for me of the kind of world that I live in, of the country that I live in, of the country that I call home, which feels like home but also doesn't feel like home, if that makes sense. So the ancestor card is just a very loaded card, and you know, the moment I saw this on that post, you know, on that fateful Instagram post, as you can call it, which introduced me to this deck, I was just smitten with this deck. It touched a part of me that was so deep and that was so intimate and that was so vulnerable that I can't even express how amazing, how kind of, you know, they say, right, it's kind of synchronous when you're supposed to come into contact with a particular deck. This deck was all that for me, and that's why I love this card, because it has so many layers to it. So that's my favorite card. My next question or next prompt for this video was, which is your favorite spread from the guidebook? Now, incidentally, I haven't used the spreads in this guidebook enough number of times for me to develop a favorite, because like I mentioned, I don't use this deck as a normal pull a card or use it as a spread deck. So, but I have used a couple of them at least once or twice, and I found the Elemental Harmonizing spread, which is this one. I'm just going to put it up. You can pause the video to just take a look. So I found this particular spread to be useful in a reading for somebody else, and I really like the remything spread, because this is really important, especially for shadow work. This particular spread is really helpful. I really enjoyed this one. And the initiation portal spread is another one that I find really helpful, because it combines both, you know, fate and free will. Yes, they say it combines these uncontrollable energetic aspects while also telling us what we can do personally, you know, physically, to manifest what we want. So those are three spreads that I definitely like. And of course, you know, on the rare occasions when I do journal using these particular cards, I kind of free flow with the spread questions by creating my own questions, creating my own spread. So that's there. My next prompt was, what do you not like about this deck and why? So now you know how much I love this deck, but what is something that I don't really like about this deck? What am I not such a fan of? One thing that I'm not such a fan of is, well, okay, you need to see this card for me to actually show it. For example, here you go. This is one of the spell cards. Now, although these spell cards are done really beautifully, I don't like the fact that they have not written the name of the spell card on the card itself. For example, unless I actually see the back, I don't know if the card is upright or reversed. So because, you know, there's no name over here, so it could very well be read in any angle. So unless I check the back, I don't know what I'm reading. Am I reading a card upright? Am I seeing it reversed? And because there's no name on these cards, I just don't know what card this is. Now, these spell cards actually correspond to other cards in the deck, which these are more active working energies of those passive energies that are there in the other cards. I really wish that the creators had actually put the name in somewhere over here, maybe in some sort of an embossing over here, so that, you know, it's in some corner where it's visible but barely so that we can at least identify what they are. Now, in their defense, they have given a few pictures of the spell cards over here, but honestly, when you look at, let's say, this card, how easy or difficult do you think it is to find that particular card on this image? It's super hard. I wish that they had, even if they didn't want to write the name on this card, that they had actually made this guidebook full color. I know this would have definitely driven up the prices, but you know what? You're making such an amazing deck. The card stock is freaking phenomenal. You know, this is one of the best card stocks I have. I think the only deck that has better card stock than this is the Reclaim Oracle by Little Darkness Press. That's like a gorgeous piece of Oracle deck. I think that's the only one which has the card stock better than this, but this deck has amazing card stock, amazing. And you know, when you're putting in so much effort, when you're giving us such a lush box, when you're giving such a huge Oracle deck where, you know, this card is literally like, look at it's like equivalent to my head, right? And you can see every single tiny, you know, paint stroke and every single embossing and every single whatever artwork on this particular card. So when you're doing all this, I would have been willing to pay at least another $5-10 extra anyways, because I'm anyways splurging $65 plus shipping to get this deck in. I would have been okay paying another $10 more if you had just made the guidebook full color. I really wish they had changed this up, because I just cannot for the life of me, even now after like more than a year, I cannot recognize the spell cards. And I really need to like look close, and I need to kind of do detective work, like, okay, fine, am I seeing a particular flower here? Am I seeing a particular leaf? And I really don't want to spend my time doing that anymore. My next prompt for this video was, what are your feelings about a mini deck version of this particular deck or different variants of this deck? Okay, mini deck, no, because this deck has just so much, each of the cards has just so much going on over here, as you can see, that, you know, if a card is smaller than this, there is no way in hell that you can find out or you can see any of the major elements that are there in this. There's just so much happening over here, and it is in fact because of the size of the cards that you can, you know, your mind can really tap into the different possible messages that are there visually speaking. If it was any smaller than this, then definitely, you know, this deck becomes unusable, and I really hope they don't come out with a mini deck. Although, you know, shuffling is really hard because of the size of the deck, I really do not want a mini deck of this. Different variants, on the other hand, is definitely something that I would be willing to take a look at. Maybe purchase, I don't know. What I would love to get from them is a follow-up on the Living Altar. If they come up with another Oracle deck or another Tarot deck, for example, that is something definitely that I would purchase, because this deck is a testament to their ability to create amazing products. So definitely that's something that I would be open to purchasing. My final prompt for this video of explore my favorite deck is, how do you see your journey ending with this deck? Now, to me, when I ask this question, to me, I see this as a lifelong journey, of course, because I love this deck. Now, if I see a journey that is ending with this deck, it would definitely be if I find someone who is as passionate about cartomancy, or who loves this deck as much and who could give it a home, preferably someone within my family, I would definitely pass this on, because I believe that, you know, ancestral blessings, especially when coupled with magnificent, you know, magical objects like this deck, definitely can add so much value to someone's life. And if I feel like this is a deck that, you know, that can add value to their life, that they are personally resonating with, then definitely I would give this to them. Otherwise, I would say, you know what, when my time comes, because I gotta go someday, people, right? Like all of us, I would kind of hope that even if I don't get the opportunity to give this deck to someone else, I trust that someone will at least be willing to kind of explore this deck. Just come in and say, okay, the occasional hello, like maybe a weekly like shuffle, and just letting the deck know that, hey, you know what, we're here. So yeah, do I want to sell it in an auction? No way. Kind of popped in my head right now. But I'm going to give that as an option over here for anyone who might want to do it. Because you know what, some decks might actually end up on the, you know, rare deck or antique deck list someday. So, but I don't think I'd ever let this thing go out of my family or out of my life, you know, in any way. So yeah, okay, that brings me to the end of this video. If you have stuck around so far, and it's been quite some time of me gushing over the Living Vault Oracle, thank you so much. I truly admire your patience, and I am very grateful for your commitment to this video and to my channel. Alright, so feel free to participate in this particular deck exploration prompts, and be sure to tag me, or like just come and comment and let me know that you've done a VR to this. Then I'll definitely come and check out your video. And yeah, like my video, subscribe to my channel, and you know what, I have a running list of books and tarot book review chapters going on, so just go check that out, and I'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye bye.